All right. Hello, everyone. And Chodesh Tov, new month um and a new Parsha. And this week's Parsha, Parshat Kedoshim, um, is a very, I just want to start by saying, is a very beautiful Parsha. It's a very beautiful Parsha. And I say that in some ways as a rhetorical move because it isn't obviously so, only in that it is it's law. It's a Parsha made up almost entirely of laws and um and so it has like the flavor of a code, and we don't often think of a code as a beautiful thing, a legal code. But a legal code can be a beautiful thing. There's a whole legal tradition centered around codes, and it's actually different from the tradition centered around case law. Um, but the reverence for the precision of a code and the ability of a code, and to a certain extent we have that um feeling in our in the United States around the Constitution as a kind of a code. But it is this is not thought of as the most sublime of the Torah's literature because it doesn't read like a literature, like a story. But I was always interested. I spent a little bit of time studying law, and I was always interested in law as literature. That was like a course, and it was like a topic that had sort of emerged before I started studying, but was sort of like a new way of looking at the laws as literature. And certainly, I think now is the correct way to look at the law in the Torah. The Torah really is, um, I've been writing this weekly Devar Torah for Hadar this year, and what I'm trying to write about is the sublime nature of the Torah as a sort of perfect work of art, and and but that can be easy to do in moments like this parting of the Red Sea, but it could be more challenging in the legal codes and in the particulars. But Parshat Kedoshim is a it's a real testament to the way that law can be a beautiful thing, not just in principle. Certainly, Parshat Kedoshim has some of the principles you know, that are at the really right at the heart of the Torah, and we're sort of in the heart of the Torah right now, right in the middle. And but also the language of Parshat Kedoshim is it's so beautiful. I mean, it's really just so beautiful, and there are all kinds of famous phrasings in Parshat the opening phrasing of Kedoshim to you, be holy, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, because holy am I, the eternal, your God. They're just like the poetry of that, like you be holy, for holy am I, the eternal, your God. There's like a lot of like kind of rhythmic moving throughout the parsha, and some of the most famous verses in the parsha, some of the verses that we quote most often, lo telech rachil ba'amecha. Don't go around spreading rumors. Don't deal falsely with your people. Lo telech rachil ba'amecha, lo tamod al dam re'echa, and don't stand on the blood of your neighbor. That's like don't stand by, don't stand on the blood of your neighbor. Like central principle there. Don't just stand by and watch as someone is slaughtered, but the language of it also. And the like lo telech rachil ba'amecha, lo tamod al dam re'echa, ani Adonai. Okay, like and that punctuation also that runs throughout the parsha, ani Adonai, ani Adonai, ani Adonai. I wouldn't repeat God's name casually, but in this case, you have to hear it. It's like the beauty of law, and that is saying something about law. That beauty is saying something about law and what law means and how law can be expressed and how law can be interpreted. And that's part of what I want to do with you today is to use the artistic quality of Parsha Kedoshim to analyze what it might be teaching us, because it's not just art for art's sake, the Torah. It's art as a way of communicating some kind of message or experience or transcendence. So, this is a religious encounter. So, let's say a blessing to summon that kind of religious spirit, this reverent spirit. We'll talk about reverence today. And then we'll look at one particular device that I guess I had seen it before, but I never really thought about it as deeply before. Well, the correction, I have not yet thought about it deeply, but I'd like to try to start doing that with you today. Just like noticed how prominent it is in the Parsha, and that is the phenomenon of couplets, which run throughout Parshat Kedoshim, which itself, Kedoshim, is a kind of plural thing, the holy things. So there's a list of holy things, and then if you look in that list, it isn't just a list. There are patterns, and there are recurring. We've already heard God's name recurring. There are other patterns recurring, and one of them is couplets. So let's take a breath here and say a blessing, and then we'll get into Parshat Kedoshim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank God for Torah. Okay, so let's take a look here. We're going to take a look right at the start. There's a certain phenomenon that we can observe in Parshat Kedoshim as it begins to give us law. So let me give you a source sheet for today, and we're going to take a look. And we're going to take a look today at let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples, maybe 5.5 actually, 5.5 examples of these couplets. And I hope by the end of that you'll be quite convinced that there's something going on here, and maybe we can reflect a little bit on what that is. But if nothing else, this is one of those, I think this is like a poetry class. And, that's also, I am no expert in poetry in a kind of general sense, but I actually feel that I stop and think that I do study poetry a lot, because a lot of the Torah, there's a theory that the whole Torah is poetry, but the Torah distinguishes certain sections that are really clearly poetry. And famously at the splitting of the Red Sea. But I think that the law, especially in chapter 19 of Parshat Kedoshim, is another place where we can look for the poetry, the rhythm of the Torah's language. So let's take a look here. I'm going to give you a source sheet. Oh, this one's not going to be linkable. Hold on. I'm getting rusty, on online. It's like for 2 years of COVID, it was just like my whole entire life was online, and I was like jing 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 jing, like all over Zoom. I'm getting rusty, but I think that's probably a good thing. Okay, so let's take a look here. I'm gonna screen share, so you don't need to pull that up, but if you like it, then there it is, and you can always link back to it. So Parshat Kedoshim. Let's start with Parshat Kedoshim's first law, which is fitting. Parshat Kedoshim's first law, fitting, because it is Shabbat. I'm about to correct myself, but in the first verse that Parshat Kedoshim gives the law that it gives is Shabbat, but there's something else there. But Shabbat is fitting because Shabbat was the first thing ever named as Kadosh, as holy, right? Vayikadesh oto, and God sanctified the seventh day, and sanctified, set aside. Keep those two ways of thinking of holiness in your mind, because we should always keep in mind that for in our tradition, the word or the root word of kadosh, which does have the holy, maybe as a translation of the experience that happens when you are makdish, when you designate something and you set it aside. Right. So God sanctified the seventh day, but God also set it apart from the others. And that's part of what Kedoshim is about, and the Parsha is explicit about that. Like I'm making Veyitem Kedoshim, and you be holy, and so that I can separate you from all, distinguish you, and you will have your own place in the world, right? From all the peoples. So there's like that's wrapped up in holiness as well, and we should think about that. Okay, but here, where do we start? We start with Shabbat, and that, like I said, well, that makes sense because Shabbat's a holy thing, but there's something else going on in Parshat Kedoshim, and it's from the start weaving ideas together. And let's take a look at the first one. So, okay. Okay, here we go. This is the beginning of the Parsha, chapter 19, very important chapter 19 of Leviticus, very important chapter in the Torah. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moshe and said, Daber el kol hadat b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem. Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, and here's that famous phrase, Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. You shall be holy because holy am I, the eternal, your God. And then the first law, that's here in the third verse. Ish imo va'aviv tiro ve'et shabtotai tishmoru ani Hashem Elokeichem. You shall each revere, literally, a man, his mother and father shall be feared. Or you all shall fear every. It's a little funny the language here, but you all shall fear your father and mother, but fear, revere, like have awe for. We were told in the Ten Commandments to honor them, but now it's also to revere them, to feel a sense of awe for them. Okay, ve'et shabtotai tishmoru, and guard my Shabbats. Okay, guard my Shabbats. Tishmoru, you shall guard my Shabbats. And again, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, and I am the Lord your God. Okay, so revere your mother and father and keep my Shabbats. I am the Lord your God. Now, there's a lot that we could say already about the things that Parshat Kedoshim is doing. One of the things that Parshat Kedoshim is clearly doing is asking us to think about since it's in one verse, and not just in one verse, but joined by a vav, right? It's not that someone decided that this was to smush two ideas together. The Torah is joining them together with an and. So something about guarding Shabbat is in conversation with revering your parents. Okay. And I might, just for the sake of time, I might say what that is, which is that in the Ten Commandments, we were told to remember Shabbat, and we were told to honor our parents, Zachor and Kabed. And now we're being told to observe Shabbat, to keep, which is language that we will get for Shabbat later in Deuteronomy, but we already have it here, and to revere, to our parents. Okay, so you can tell how these two ideas that are in the Ten Commandments have now been shifted, and there's a different aspect of the relationship to Shabbat, which has more to do with caution and reverence and keeping, and not the active engaging, honoring, remembering, almost celebrating. This is a different kind of stance towards these principles. So that's a strong statement. to begin with, that now the holiness laws will have a different take on those kind of principles we learned in the Ten Commandments. The other thing that is happening right away in Parshat Kedoshim is that we see and you might argue that we see it even in this verse, the blending of holiness as a concept, which we've been dealing with for all of the book of Leviticus. I can't say this officially, but you wouldn't be surprised if I said it was the primary virtue of Vayikra, of Leviticus. Now, all of a sudden, holiness is coming in the form of laws that we would all keep, not laws for the priest, but laws that we would all keep. And that itself is a statement. But then Parshat Kedoshim goes on to name principles of justice and not just principles of holiness. And Shabbat is a holy thing, but is having reverence for our parents a holy thing, or is it a justice thing? That's like maybe in a blurry line. But Parshat Kedoshim goes on soon to talk about not stealing, and goes on to talk about, we'll see soon, not perverting or subverting justice. So there's a blend happening, and that's actually what I wrote about this week. So why don't I take a moment to self-promote and no, Hadar promote. My work is only on behalf of the mothership. So let me give you the link to this essay, which in some ways is kind of what got me started on this conversation we're having. This is an essay where I really talk about the commingling of holiness and justice. And if you know me, and if you knew me when I was working as a rabbi at IKAR, you know that this is like a big thing for me. And the idea that, because IKAR is a beautiful blend of this, and a kind of manifestation of this, I think. This idea that holiness and justice are two of maybe like right up there, you can never say top two, but two of the top primary virtues in the Torah's articulation, certainly in Leviticus and Shemot. And there's a kind of commingling of those virtues that we'll see later in our discussion, but I discussed in a fuller way in that essay. So that's happening. Okay, this is all just a lead-in to now beginning to look at this particular phenomenon. Now that we have the context of what's going on in Kedoshim, this particular phenomenon of couplets. So take a look here, because for all that, there are so many ways that we could have analyzed that verse, but for all that, there's something else. Now that we're spotting mashups and patterns and rhythmic language, there's something else that happens just in the very same chapter that takes up the language of the verse we just read. So let's just read the verse we just read again, and then we're going to start seeing these couplets. Ish imo va'aviv tirou, ve'et shabtotai tishmoru, ani Hashem Elokeichem. You shall each revere your mother and father and keep my Shabbats. I am your God. Then, towards the end of this chapter, in the 30th verse, we find this line: Et Shabtotai Tishmoru. Okay, you shall keep my Shabbats. That is exact. You can just look. You don't need to even know Hebrew to see that this phrase is the same as this phrase. Et Shabtotai Tishmoru, Umikdashi Tirau, Ani Hashem. And my sanctuary, meaning the altar, the mikdash, the tabernacle, of eventually the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, my sanctuary, my holy place, you should revere. I am Hashem. Okay. So now we can start doing some of what I promised at the outset, some of the sort of poetic thinking, but we're also thinking legally. So poetry and law at the same time. If we are told to guard carefully the Shabbat, and remember, that's not celebrating Shabbat, but keeping it, refraining from desecrating the Shabbat, and to revere our parents in one verse. And then we repeat the idea of keeping carefully the Shabbat in a second verse. But now the thing that we revere is the temple. Well, I don't want to ask too pointed a question. What do we extract from that, like parallelism, right? Just as you would keep Shabbat, so you should revere your parents. Just as you keep Shabbat, so you should revere the temple. So what are we learning about the parallelism there, where everything is the same except the thing that we revere in one case is our parents, and the thing that we revere in the other case is the temple, the tabernacle, the altar, God's house. Okay? So let's just think a little bit like poetically here, and I wonder if anyone has an interpretation of that. I do, and I could like do this the whole time, but I want to I want to have a little bit of a conversation here, and I certainly don't have an official read on these things. I want to more than anything want to kind of bring us into a way of reading that we can continue to practice when we read the Torah's laws. So anyone have a thought now so far about the parallelism once more between the verse that says, your father and mother you should revere. Ish imo ve'aviv tira'u, and ve'et shabtotai tishmoru. And my Shabbats you should guard. Ani Hashem, I am the eternal God. Then later, and notice the order is different here. The order is different, and so that's also a way that the Torah creates this kind of parallelism. That's the way I think they talk about it in biblical literary studies, like Robert Alter kind of writing parallelism. So this is like a classic device, but the parallel can be inverted so that it's A, B, B, A, and that's like a chiasm, they call it. So we might say that there's a chiasm here, like a chasm that is formed, so to speak, between et shabtotai tishmeru umikdashi tira'u ani Hashem, so that it's like a fear or a reverence sandwich, or actually it's a Shabbat sandwich with fear or reverence as the bread. Now, I don't know if I made that whole thing too silly, but okay. Then now I think I've spoken out enough of the technicalities. Noah, Old Faithful, will start us off. Thank you, Noah. A great student of Torah.
Sure. With the first instance, it's I think talking about Shabbat in the family home, that we're respecting, honoring our parents, and through them learning how to do all these Shabbat rituals, and then it moves that you respect, reverence to the communal places, and then we're seeing and observing how the communities observing the Shabbat in the holy spaces, and bringing all of that together to be the wider Jewish lens.
Great. I love that. I love that. That is not just a poetic, a beautiful, but a quite sophisticated analysis of the messaging that the Torah. We're trying to interpret this now. We have like a structure that's been presented to us in the language of the Torah. I just saw someone in the chat say that the chiastic structure is a mnemonic device. The M always trips me out there. But right, it's a tool to aid in memorizing the material, but also there's a structure there that is chosen where certain things are on the outside and certain things are on the inside. First, before we get into that like very specific structure, Noah just sees the themes that are being put into conversation into kind of a symphony, a little mini symphony. And the symphony is, as Noah reads it, that we are describing like society in general, but the ideal society taking place in the Shabbat space. What does that Shabbat space include? It includes holiness. It must be guarded carefully. It's not just a celebration. That's the move from Zachor to Shamor, from remember to observe. But how do we do that? Well, we have reverence for things. We are careful in general in our relationship to Shabbat. But one of the things that we will do in our relationship to Shabbat is we will make offerings. We will serve God. We will have reverence for God and God's space. There's a ritual component to the reverence of Shabbat. And then we also like Shabbat should be a time when, God forbid we speak disrespectfully to our parents on Shabbat. I mean, God forbid we speak disrespectfully to our parents at all. I happen to know that my mom is at an appointment today and she's often on the call. And so I will just confess that I speak disrespectfully to my mom and I feel terribly ashamed of it. But that we all, we have relationships with our parents, they get heated. Like it's in some ways like I feel terrible and in some ways it's very normal. But imagine that I took Shabbat and I said, Shabbat, I'm not going to speak an unkind word to my mom. I'm not going to I'm not going to get frustrated. I'm not going to, I just want good respect. There's something about being in Shabbat that also should have a social reverence element. Okay, beautiful. I want to take one more thought on this and then from Kathy, and then we'll push forward a little bit and do this kind of work with the next parallelism, the next couplet in Kedoshim. Kathy, please.
Yeah, this really builds on what both Noah and you were saying, but, rather than see them as reversed order the second time, that the first time it's parents, then Sabbath, and then the next time it's Sabbath comes first. If you look at it as a continuation, in other words, you start with your parents, you go to the Sabbath, revering and whatever, guarding and all that stuff, but that actually the you're not really reversing any order, you're just going to the third step. So in the second verse you have the second step, Sabbath, and then the third step, which is the sanctuary. And so it seems very kind of gut level making sense that you start with your very personal relationships and just family, and then being born. I mean, yeah, how much closer can that get? You move into Sabbath, which is a much broader concept and a more social concept, but then the third step is really sanctuary and something much more kind of abstract, but they all build on each other that way.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Once again, I'm like moved by the beautiful, but also sophisticated. And beauty can be sophisticated. I don't mean to, but there's a kind of, this work that Noah and Kathy have just done for us, both a blend that what I think this is the point of our material today is the blending of the sublime with the moral, because there's something about the moral, or maybe moral's the wrong word actually here, because it's the holy, which is a little bit of a different relationship to behavioral conduct. What would it mean not to act in a way that is actively good, but is carefully reverent, right? Okay. All right. Let's take one more example before there are a few here, and I fear we won't get to them all, and we'll get to the ones that we especially should. But let's just see how fast we move along, and maybe we won't need to totally analyze these all, but let's just start taking some other examples here. So okay, so let's take this is a random one, but it's a nice, in some ways an easy one, because the language is so parallel and so kind of unusual, and the language is a language that becomes a tractate of the Mishnah, peah. The corner, we often translate it as the peah, the corner, but really it's like the edges, because it doesn't have to be at a corner, the corner of a field. And this is a very famous principle in Jewish law, that you leave an area in your field where the poor can come and gather food. And there are other things that you have to leave, like whatever drops when you're collecting, when you're harvesting, or whatever you forget to harvest, you didn't get to in time. So all of those things, leket, shicha, and peah, are these agricultural institutions that provide for the for some public, communal fund to support the poor. Okay, so here is the verse in this same chapter. We're in one chapter. All these couplets are in one chapter. Okay, uvekutzrechem et ktsir artzechem lo techale pe'at sadcha liktzor. Sorry, uvekutzrechem et ktsir artzechem lo techale pe'at sadcha liktzor. So when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges, pe'at, of your field, sadcha. Okay. So that's one of the principles of this, or one of the applications of this principle of leaving something for the poor. You should not pick your vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. Le'ani v'lager tazovotam. For the poor and the stranger you shall leave them. And again, that same punctuation or variations on it. Ani Hashem Elokechem. I am the Lord your God. Okay, we could talk about that, but we should also notice that just a bit further down in the same chapter, Lo takifu pe'at roshechem. You shall not round off the edges, not the corners, although sometimes it's translated that way. Pe'at roshechem, the corners of your heads. V'lo tashchit et pe'at zikanecha, and you shall not destroy the edges of your beard. Okay. So from this we learn a principle, and I'll continue the thought. You shall not make gashes in your flesh for the dead. And now you start to realize, oh, these are like maybe all ancient. This is certainly the way that Rambam reads this. These are all ancient practices that had to do with other cultic religious practices. So like I'm watching right now Shogun, and in Shogun there's a Portuguese priest, and he has his head shaved like this in the middle, right? And then now, Judaism's got its weird hair practices, not making fun of everybody, but it's very just like, whoa, that guy's doing it for a religious reason. Don't do any of those things. And that's also the pe'at roshechem and the pe'at zikanecha, the edges of your hair and the edges of your beard. And that's why there are certain edges like here that by tradition we don't shave too closely, right? And that explains the peot, right? And that's the payas comes from this language. Okay, so there's a little quick lesson in payas, but why compare the corners of your face to the corners of your field? Why compare giving food to the poor to carefully guarding from cultic religious haircuts? Anyone see a connection there? Anyone see a connection? Okay, I'm not going to. I want us to see these, so I'm not going to force it every time. But I will just say that this, in some ways, is, if nothing else, the easy connection is just, oh, again, Parsha Kedoshim is really interested in blending principles of social justice. I really mean the term social justice in society. How will we accomplish the goal of everybody having enough to survive? That's an important principle of holiness. Blending that with our most, our religious ideals, our religious rituals, not religious ideals, but religious sort of sacred practices. Those things that we might call chukim. What's interesting is that Jewish tradition distinguishes between mishpatim and chukim, those laws which make some sense, and then those laws which make no sense. We just do them because God said so. And this haircutting thing, that would be like a chok, maybe. Although maybe you could say it makes sense because there are, but there's a concept of I'll finish that thought. You could say it makes sense because there are religious practices out there that you have to stay away from, and so this is like a social benefit. That's the way the Rambam would talk about it. But I think it's fair to say that some of these laws in Parsha Kedoshim appear as just sort of God's mandate It's just a chok. But Kedoshim is not the same as chukim. Kedoshim, holy things, is saying that the holiness can come from the social implementing social justice, and holiness can come from like strange religious practices that just devote you to your God and your tradition, like keeping kosher. Okay. All right. Let's move along here. Let's see how much time we have. I don't want to like just clock through these neither too quickly nor without reflection. So let's see where else we can go. This one I will skip because it's two verses in a row. In some ways, it's not it's not the most exciting parallelism, but it does contrast lying to each other and the kind of lying that evokes God's name. So that's like just a very simple example of how we might think about two aspects of lying and what the different kinds of damage that they do. But this is the one that caught my eye this week because I was writing about justice and holiness in particular. And this is just fascinating to me. I noticed, in verse 15, it seems to me, Kedoshim is really making its statement, the one I've been articulating, this blend of holiness and justice, making it explicit, because in verse 15, we actually get the word for justice, or one of the words for justice, which is mishpat. Lo tasu avel b'mishpat, lo tisa pnei dal v'lo tehedar pnei gadol, but tzedek tishpot amitecha. You shall not subvert justice. Lo tasu avel. Avel is like, destruction, of subversion, an unjust, a terrible ruining of justice. Avel b'mishpat. Lo tisa pnei dal v'lo tehedar pnei gadol. You shall not pick up literally the face of the poor, and you shall not glorify. This is the organization I work for, Hadar. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. I want to say a little bit. Hadar makes an interesting appearance in this week's Parsha, and I want to say a little bit about a couple of parallels here. But let's just stay with mishpat, justice, for a second. So fine. So you shall not subvert justice, and we have these applications that are fairly intuitive. Why? Because you have to judge correctly and fairly according to the law, and not because you want to help someone out. So you subvert justice. You don't actually follow principles of justice. You feel bad for someone, nor do you want to just kiss up. This is the way I would almost translate Tedar pnei gadol, to glorify the face to find glory in the face of the rich. Like, oh, look at that celebrity. Wow, I love celebrities. I want to be like this. Look at that billionaire. I want to be like that billionaire. Like, what is a glorious sight to see the face of someone that I follow on social media. Like whatever it is, don't do that. Okay, that's an application of that's a real world application of not subverting justice. But tell me about this parallel, which I then noticed was at the end of the same chapter here. Let me share this with you, and don't worry, I'm saving the best for last. Okay, so we're not just randomly plowing through. There's that phrase again. Lo tasu avel b'mishpat. You shall not make any subversion of justice. Bamida, bamishkal, uvamsura. With length, weight, or capacity. Oh, now we're talking about something else. And lest we had any doubt what that might mean, Moznei tzedek, avnei tzedek, efat tzedek, v'hin tzedek yelechem. You shall have an honest balance, tzedek, honest like righteous, like correct, an honest balance, honest weights, an honest ephah, that's a unit of volume, and an honest hin, a unit of liquid volume. Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzeti etchem eretz Yisrael. I am your God who freed you from the land of Egypt. Okay, now we've really got something to think about. We're talking about justice. We're naming the word for justice, mishpat, that principle by which Abraham holds God accountable. when Abraham says you can't destroy the righteous along with the wicked. That's shofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? That's this word here. But it's not just about treating the good and the bad, the rich and the poor, everyone fairly and according to a principle of justice. It's also about measurements. It's also about correct measurements. Now, fine, correct measurements are a part of justice. But why compare correct measurements and precise, like units of measurement to court cases where you might kiss up to the rich tycoon, celebrity, or you might, there's another version of it, whereas you might, feel so bad for this poor single parent and they just don't have what they need and I'm just going to award them money. And that's also not. Okay, so let's think about that. And I see a couple of people have some thoughts on this parallelism. Let's turn to Richard.
Well, obviously in the first situation where you're being put in the position of being a judge, the issue of dispensing justice is expressly on the table. In the second one, you also are sort of, I guess, allocating resources, dispensing value. And the question is, are you doing that in a just fashion? It's kind of elevating it to that level of justice. Both of them also have a power dynamic where you expressly are in the power of being able to judge in the first one. And in the second one, because you are in possession of what is the kind of honest measure and what's the true balance, and your counterparty in the transaction is not, you also are in the superior and power position. And you're being asked to exercise it justly.
Right. I'm just like thinking about the synthesis of the 2 points you made, which I'm sure you intend, that you have power and you are distributing units of justice or of your favor, of your measurement, and so like your power will be kind of measured out. You will afford it to people, but it has to be, there's a kind of precision to thinking about how you use your power in the world carefully. Carefully use your power in the world carefully. And that's like a profound way to think about this parallelism. Joel, what say you?
Well, I was struck by something else in setting up these parallels. Most of the cases that we've looked at don't have the parts of the parallel right next to each other. So going back to the Shabbat one about you should be holy, for I am holy, revere mother and father, and keep the Sabbaths, right? That's in Leviticus 1:19, 1-3, right? And then further down, but not exactly next to it, you get, you shall keep my Sabbaths and revere my sanctuary, right? And then when it comes to edges, about the corners or edges of the field, that's Leviticus 19, 9-10, very well. But then there's you have to wait a little while until you get the other part of the parallel in 27-28. Men should not round off the edges of your head or the edges of your beard, and then gashing your flesh and all of that. And then with justice and Hadar, right? You shouldn't subvert justice. Don't favor one party over the other. That's in verse 15. But then don't subvert justice in matters of length, weight, or capacity. That's in 35-30. So there are parallel thoughts, but they're kind of distanced from each other. And it might have been that the Torah would smash them one next to the other to more directly call out the parallel. So I'm just wondering why the parts of the parallel have some space between them, if there's some importance or something to be said for that.
Great. Okay, so this is a very, talk about precise measurements. This belongs in this class, this analysis, though to really do it justice would be beyond the scope of the class. I mean, I think so. The point that Joel is making, and thoroughly there, is that we really wanted that echo. We might have thought we'd put it one close to the other, but actually they're often very far apart in the chapter. So what's going on there? Why the spacing, and what's in between? Why do we have to go spotting these parallelisms instead of just having them there? So now, one thing I think is true is that it's just like, I think it's just the subtlety of the Torah's art is it's not like it's not blaring at you. It's something for you to pick up, because the experience of, I think in general, as a klal gadol, I would say the experience of discovering something in the Torah is part of the Torah's art. In this case, we could also think about the actual, when we talk about a chiastic structure, we're talking about one that heads inward towards a center and then echoes outward in a kind of reflection on the other side, so that it is not just A, B, B, A, but it could be A, B, C, C, B, A, or it could be A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or it could be like more complicated than that, or like, 1, 2, 3, 7, 9, 9, 9, 7, 3, 2, 1. There's some kind of like chiastic structure where there's like a parallelism. So it's not always exact, and I would not say, oh, you just throw this analysis on the Torah and you'll understand everything. But as you were talking, I was noticing that some of these parallels, let's take a look, are very far apart in the chapter. Like the first one, right? 3 and 30, and then some of them more towards the center are very are spaced out more like a little further away. So from 3 and 30, we got to 9 and 27. So we're heading inwards, and we could try to do that analysis, but I never find it to be quite exact. And I think that it's not necessarily all about creating a geometric Torah. Like, these patterns appear in the midst sometimes of more hazy flow, and I think that's art. That's the way it works. Okay, let's see. I'm almost out of time here. I want to take a comment from Alice, and then I want to show you one last thing, and then if we have time, we'll circle back for more comments.
Okay, I just wanted to say that to me, the combination of the honest weights and the no favoritism is intuitively just aspects of the same principle. And maybe it's because our culture has so internalized this, but I'm thinking of our symbolic like icon of justice with the blindfold and holding the balance. You have a balance and it comes out how it comes out. And we're always saying this about the Supreme Court is always saying this about we don't care who it is. We don't care how we want it to come out. We're just being honest umpires. So if you have those ideal, those accurate measurements, you just follow them.
Yeah. Very, very beautifully expressed, Alice. That's exactly, I think that's a really wise synthesis of this parallelism, which is to say that you're drawing another parallelism, like to our own, some of the symbols we see in other justice systems, right? Like Lady Liberty holding, or not Lady Liberty, Lady Justice holding scales. Why scales? You're right. And the precision of calling balls and strikes. We talked about codes at the beginning, and this idea that a code could be perfect and contain the exact message, and the Constitution is worded exactly because you have to, to darshan because it's a the and not a and there's some idea of being precise, but not just because it's like mathematically beautiful, but because we want to be fair. And we're striving towards an objective, a not discriminatory way of applying the law. And, you know, there are other legal theories, legal realism came along, and I think we're still very influenced by it, and suggested, no, judges are always influenced, and they're always like unconsciously even legislating from the bench. And we just have to accept that and appoint liberal or conservative judges. And, you know, that's just the way it is. But that's not what the Torah is striving for, I don't think. And I'm not sure whether the striving itself matters, even if we recognize, the Torah certainly recognizes that judges can and subvert justice, or it wouldn't be warning us. Okay, so all beautifully put, and we see some of that language in the way that we describe our justice system. That was another great metaphor, calling balls and strikes. It is what it is. It's inside the box or it's not. So beautifully put, all of that, Alice. There's more to say also about Hadar here, but I will. I only have a few minutes, so I want to jump to the last example, and I'll give a whole class on Hadar sometime, because that's what I'm here to do. But I want to give one last example, which is this idea of love, and now loving and who we love. And this is the most famous line. Talk about a poetic line. This is the most famous line maybe in the Torah. Maybe in the Torah. Certainly in Parsha Kedoshim. Oh, and let me just say, I should say, and someone maybe can find a link to it at bookshop.org, but Shai Held, one of the founders of Hadar, has a new book out called Judaism is About Love. And he is really talking about like how this verse, you know, really in some ways, this verse becomes a central ethic in Judaism, and then of course, like through Judaism into Christianity, but that we've kind of lost sight of the idea that it's actually a central principle in Judaism. So that book, there was just a talk at IKAR on Tuesday night. He gave a talk, maybe some of you were there, but really worth looking at that book and checking it out. Shai is really one of the great thinkers in the Jewish community in our time. So as promotion to that, I hope somebody put it in the chat. But I have two more minutes with you, so I want to give you just this last piece of Torah, which is that this most famous line, Lo tikom v'lo titor et bnei amecha ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Hashem. You shall not take vengeance and nor bear a grudge against members of your people. Bnei amecha, members of your people. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your fellow, meaning, and this insertion is like meaning another Israelite. So it's a beautiful principle, but it's particular. Let's not deny it. The children of your people and your neighbor. Okay, so it seems actually very limited, but if we look towards the end of Parshat Kedoshim, we find this phrasing. And when a stranger, and in the Torah's language, it's not a convert, but a stranger, someone else outside the nation, resides with you in your land, lo tonuoto, you shall not wrong them. Ke'ezrach mikem yeh lachem. They'll be just like a citizen of yours, hager hagaritchem, that stranger who resides with you. Ve'ahavta lo kamocha. And you shall love him like yourself. Ve'ahavta lo kamocha. Why? Because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You remember what that's like. Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am the Lord your God. Right? So, you know, you could look at this verse and say, well, it's a principle and it's a beautiful principle. You love someone else just like yourself, but it only legislates that for other Israelites, for members of your family, for your tribe. And maybe, you know, it's easier to start with your tribe, loving your tribe like yourself, loving your partner like yourself, loving your family like yourself, then loving your nation like yourself. Maybe you got to start there. Love your fellow Jew like you love yourself. But then don't forget that those from other nations that live among you, you also love them like yourself. That's harder to do, but that's right here in the Torah's language, right here. Ve'ahavta lo kamocha, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Most famous 3 words maybe in the Torah. And just further down in the same chapter, two out of three of the same words with the ger replaced with the neighbor, the stranger replaced with the neighbor. That is some beautiful poetic messaging of justice. So may we love our fellow Jew as we love ourselves always, because they're ours and they're just like us and they're family. And may we also learn to love the stranger just like we love our fellow Jew, just like we love ourselves. May we find that love as well. So I wish us that as we head into another week of striving for holiness, striving. I'll see you all later. Shabbat shalom to you all. Okay.